At 8:12 on Christmas Eve morning, my father told me not to come to dinner. I was sitting in Lantern Yard's project office, with 2 seating charts open on my desk, and a punch list report balanced across my keyboard. Outside the glass wall, electricians were testing the last emergency lights in a residential corridor that still smelled of paint and new flooring. 84 apartments stood on the other side of that corridor, finished enough to photograph, but not yet cleared for anyone to live in. Downstairs, our winter warming center had its own seasonal clearance and would begin taking guests that night. My phone showed Douglas Keene. He did not say Merry Christmas. "Rachel, your mother and I have decided to keep dinner family only this year." For a second, I thought he was making a joke too dry to recognize. Marian had texted me 2 weeks earlier to ask whether I still preferred cranberry sauce without orange peel. My place had not been tentative then. "I am family," I said. He exhaled as though I had complicated an obvious instruction. "You know what I mean. Bethany and Owen are building a life together. Tonight should be for the people who support this family." There it was. Support. In my father's vocabulary, support did not mean affection, patience, or showing up when somebody was tired. It meant agreeing that the family business should sit at the center of every decision. "Does Mom know you're calling me?" "Your mother wants a peaceful evening." It was not an answer, and we both knew it. I looked through the office window at the old brick arches we had preserved from the freight depot. 4 years earlier, snow had blown through broken panes in those openings. That morning, a resident services coordinator was hanging paper stars made by children from the motel families we had served during construction. "All right," I said. "I won't come." Douglas went quiet, perhaps disappointed that I had not given him a fight he could retell. "Good. I knew you could be reasonable." He ended the call before I could ask why reason always required my absence. I let myself sit still for 1 minute. Then I put my phone face down and returned to the list in front of me. The Lantern Yard donor and resident dinner was not a consolation plan. We had scheduled it in September, around substantial completion, the warming center opening, and the final night of our capital campaign. I had work to do, whether my family wanted me at their table or not. At 6:40 that evening, I was checking the accessible route from the main hall to the warming center when Celia Brennan asked if we could speak privately. Celia was Brennan Commercial Bank's market president and one of Lantern Yard's early individual donors. She had spent most of the evening talking to residents and kitchen instructors, not posing for photographs. Her expression now was careful in a way that made me stop walking. We stepped into a small meeting room beside the hall. Through the wall came the soft scrape of chairs and the event coordinator's sound check. "I need to separate 2 roles before I say anything," Celia said. "I am here tonight as a donor. The question I received came from our commercial credit team. I will not make the credit decision." "What question?" She opened a secure message on her bank-issued tablet, but kept the screen angled toward herself. "The team is verifying a representation involving Open Hearth. I am authorized to quote that representation to the organization named in it. Nothing else from the borrower file." I nodded. She read slowly. "Keene Building Supply is described as a principal development partner in Lantern Yard, a $31.8 million housing campus." For a moment, all I heard was the muffled sound check through the wall. Keene Building Supply had sold us materials. 1 order. Competitively bid, delivered, inspected, and paid. My father had not developed Lantern Yard. He had not sponsored it. He had never contributed $1 to the campaign. "Who made that representation?" I asked, although I already knew. Celia held my gaze. "The verification request concerns a proposal submitted by your father's company." At 8:12 that morning, Douglas had said dinner was for people who supported the family. At 6:40, I understood what my absence might be supporting. Celia gave me one more warning before we left the room. Do not assume a verification question means the bank has reached a conclusion. I won't. And do not identify the applicant or this request in your remarks. Open Hearth is entitled to answer for itself. I cannot discuss the larger file. Her precision steadied me. Douglas treated boundaries as insults, but Celia used them to keep power from spreading beyond its proper place. She could route a question. I could answer for my organization. Someone without a personal connection would decide what the answer meant. When she returned to the hall, I read Marian's last messages. One asked about cranberry sauce. One reminded me dinner was at 6. The last, sent after Douglas's call, said only, "I hope your event goes well tonight." She knew I was no longer coming, and had chosen a sentence that required no explanation. I typed, "Did Dad ask you to uninvite me?" Then deleted it. Whatever she answered would not change the claim Celia had read. The hall clock showed 6:44. Volunteers needed approval for 2 additional warming center cots. The caterer needed the late seating count. I answered both before finding Imani. I did not stop being responsible because Douglas had found a new way to hurt me. Lantern Yard remained a housing campus, with obligations that existed before his call and would remain after the bank's decision. I asked Celia not to discuss the verification in the event hall. "I wouldn't," she said. "The credit team will send Open Hearth a limited request through the secure channel. It will identify the assertions they need verified. Because I know you and have donated to this project, another officer will own the review and any recommendation." That boundary mattered. It meant Celia was not offering me a favor, and I could not ask for one. She was warning the right organization that its name had entered a record it might need to correct. I thanked her, then called Imani Brooks. Imani was our operations director, which in practice meant she knew where the legal record ended and everyone's memory began. She found me in the small compliance office with her event badge still clipped to a green sweater. "You have the face you make when a number does not reconcile," she said. "My father's company is claiming it was a principal developer of Lantern Yard." She did not gasp. Imani rarely spent energy on reactions that could wait. "Where?" "A Brennan credit submission. We should receive a limited verification request. I need the roll ledger, the Keen invoice, the development agreement, and the campaign photo license preserved in one review folder." Before we answer anyone. She sat at the second workstation and began requesting secure access from our document system. While it loaded, I watched volunteers carry trays past the office door, and thought about how Douglas had arrived at a definition of support that could make his claim feel reasonable to him. He had expected both his daughters to join Keen Building Supply. Bethany did, first in communications and later in client relations. I studied civil engineering. Douglas paid my first year's tuition and mentioned it for the next 15 years as if tuition had been an option contract on my adult life. After graduation, I worked on municipal sites. One January, I was assigned to survey a motel after the heat failed and the city ordered it closed. Families stood in the parking lot with garbage bags of clothes while agencies argued over who had authority to place them. I could calculate drainage capacity and load paths, but the problem in front of me was that a mother with 2 children had nowhere warm to go. That winter changed the direction of my work. I joined Open Hearth, then eventually became its executive director. My engineering training remained useful every day, but Douglas heard only that I had chosen a nonprofit over his company. Bethany's choices were easier for him to recognize. Her engagement to Owen added another advantage. Owen had spent his early career under a commercial banker who had since retired from Brennan. To Douglas, relationships were assets, and holidays were places to deploy them. "He'll say the company helped," I told Imani. "He'll say his invoice, the Keen name, and raising me make the project a family success." "Those are 3 different claims," she said. "Only one belongs in procurement." That was why I needed her. I remembered the last call I had received from Marian before that morning. She had said Christmas would be simple this year. Both daughters, Owen, dinner at 6. I had believed her because believing her required less grief than asking whether Douglas had approved every place setting. The secure system opened. Imani created a legal hold folder and began copying files without changing their metadata. "We need one rule," I said. "What happened this morning does not decide what we say tonight. The record decides." Agreed. She opened the procurement index. The invoice appeared exactly where it belonged. Then another notification arrived. The bank's preliminary verification excerpt. Imani read it once, then turned the monitor toward me. The deck had not merely called Keene Building Supply a partner. It said the company had co-developed Lantern Yard and supplied 40% of the project's materials. At the bottom of the request was the submission time, 7:36 a.m. Douglas had sent the claim 36 minutes before he called to remove me from Christmas dinner. While Imani assembled the files, the morning call replayed with new emphasis. Douglas had said, "People who support this family, not people this family loves." Support was a transaction in which he set the price after accepting payment. When I was 26, he had offered me a management position at Keene. I thanked him and declined because I had just accepted municipal work. For years afterward, he described that decision as rejection. He never mentioned that the job would have placed me under him, in a role he designed at a salary he could cite whenever I disagreed. Bethany learned a different survival method. She anticipated what he wanted and called it closeness. I resisted and got called cold. Neither role left much room for two adult daughters with independent judgment. Lantern Yard unsettled Douglas because it was legible outside his system. City officials, lenders, investors, residents, and a board could name my authority without asking his opinion. He could minimize nonprofit work at home, but the restored depot stood where other people could measure it. That did not mean I had built it alone. In fact, the project proved the opposite. My authority existed inside a network of contracts and accountability. I could not spend campaign money however I wished. I could not move a resident in early because I felt generous. I could not call myself owner because I led the organization. Douglas saw those limits as weakness. I saw them as the reason Lantern Yard could outlast me. Imani interrupted my thoughts by asking who should have read access to the review folder. We limited it to her, me, council, and our board compliance chair, if escalation became necessary. Staff working the dinner did not need to know. Residents certainly did not. I sent Marian one message. "I received your note. I am working the event as planned." I did not ask her to choose sides in the middle of a compliance review. There would be time later to ask what she had known. Then I turned toward the files that could answer a simpler question. What had Keene Building Supply actually done? Lantern Yard began as a problem nobody could solve cheaply. The freight depot sat on the edge of St. Paul, with a roof that leaked, brickwork that needed stabilization, and soil records thick enough to discourage anyone looking for an easy ribbon cutting. Open Hearth did not buy it because I had a sentimental vision. We spent 9 months testing whether 84 apartments, a training kitchen, and a warming center could operate there without consuming money needed for services. The answer became yes only after 4 years of approvals, redesigns, public meetings, financing deadlines, and choices that never appeared in a photograph. That history mattered because every dollar came with a party entitled to the truth. The total development budget was $31.8 million. A $14.6 million construction to permanent loan funded work under lender controls. $10.8 million came through tax credit equity with its own investor oversight. The city housing grant contributed $3.4 million against defined milestones. Our capital campaign commitments supplied the remaining $3 million. No part of that stack belonged to me personally. I was Open Hearth's executive director and a civil engineer by training. I coordinated the sponsor team, answered to a board, and signed documents in an organizational capacity. Lantern Yard was not my private property, no matter how often Douglas called it Rachel's building when he wanted to sound proud. The executed development agreement made the roles plain. Open Hearth Housing Trust was sponsor and operator. North River Builders was general contractor. The city remained land lessor under a long-term agreement. The closing files were maintained with the outside counsel who had handled the construction loan and tax credit closing. Keene Building Supply appeared in the procurement file as a vendor. Imani opened the invoice. $186,400. A limited materials package. Delivered in 3 scheduled releases, inspected without defect, paid in full. Small against the total project budget, she said, but total budget is not the denominator for a claim about materials. Then we do not use that comparison. We use the invoice and procurement record. Not remotely. We did not need a percentage calculation to know the claim was false, but the scale made the distortion visible. Douglas had taken a legitimate order and inflated it until it looked like institutional capacity. I had not handed him that order. His company had submitted a compliant bid through the same process as everyone else. I had disclosed the family relationship and left scoring to the procurement committee. Some board members had worried I would avoid Keene merely to prove independence. I had insisted the company should neither benefit nor suffer because its owner was my father. When the contract was completed, Douglas invited me to lunch. He called the sale proof that family opened doors for family. The bid opened the door, I told him. The company delivered what it promised. That's the whole story. He had smiled in the patient way he used when he believed time would bring me around. You always make things colder than they need to be. To him, accuracy was cold if it denied him ownership of someone else's achievement. Outside the compliance office, residents began arriving for dinner. I heard names being checked against the seating list, and a child asking whether the paper stars could go home afterward. The sounds kept the review from becoming an abstract battle between my father and me. Lantern Yard had obligations to people who would never see a lender deck. Imani exported the development agreement's roll schedule and the paid invoice into the review folder. She logged who accessed each file and when. E1 and E2, she said, using the labels from our internal evidence list. Invoice and governing roles. The formal bank request refreshed on the screen. There were now 3 assertions. Keene was a principal development partner. Keene supplied 40% of project materials. Keene had permission to use Lantern Yard's campaign photograph. The first 2 were contradicted by records already in front of us. The third sent Imani into the communications archive. Which photograph? I asked. She opened the bank's quoted description. It was the dusk image of Lantern Yard's restored facade. Every window lit, taken before the interior units were complete. Our campaign had paid for that photograph and licensed it carefully. It was also the image Douglas had once asked me to send him for the family newsletter. I had never sent it. Imani searched the correspondence archive. Douglas had requested the facade photograph 8 months earlier. I had replied that campaign images could not be redistributed until communications approved a use. He had never followed the approval channel. So he knew permission mattered, she said. It shows he was told to request it. It does not prove who placed the image in the deck. Right. We answer ownership and permission, not his state of mind. Separating knowledge from inference had taken years to build into Open Hearth's culture. During financing, optimism could become a false certification if nobody marked the line. We trained staff to say scheduled instead of guaranteed, committed instead of received, substantial completion instead of open. Those distinctions sounded fussy until someone with less power had to pay for a promise made by someone with more. From the window, I could see residents posing beneath the restored depot clock. The original mechanism was not connected, so its hands remained at 3:17. No one in the courtyard knew that another photograph of the facade sat in a lender deck across town. Douglas had borrowed the building's finished appearance while removing the contracts beneath it. The image persuaded because it concealed governance, financing, and the unphotogenic work that made the lights legal to turn on. That was what we had to restore, not my pride, but the missing structure. Our event coordinator appeared at the office door and held up 2 fingers. 20 minutes until remarks. I'll be there, I said. She looked from me to Imani and sensed enough not to ask what was wrong. Imani found the campaign license in 4 minutes. The dusk photograph could be used by Openhearth, the photographer, and media partners named in the agreement. Keen Building Supply was not named. Vendors could request separate permission. None had. That did not prove how the image had appeared in Douglas's materials, but it answered the bank's authorized question. Openhearth had not granted permission. The secure request arrived in final form at 6:52. It quoted only the 3 assertions involving us and explained why they mattered. The representations had been submitted that morning as material support for Keen Building Supply's projected growth in institutional contracts and for the warehouse expansion behind a proposed $7.5 million revolving credit and expansion facility. That sentence was the bridge I had been missing. Douglas was not borrowing against Lantern Yard. He was using it as evidence that his company had already operated at a level that made future institutional work credible. If Lantern Yard was not his proof point, the bank would have to reassess the projections attached to it. The request did not show revenue, collateral, guarantors, or any unrelated part of the borrower package. I did not know the company's broader financial condition, and I did not need to know it. The 3 Openhearth assertions were enough for us to answer. An independent credit officer was listed as the record owner. Celia was copied only as the executive who had routed the organizational verification because she knew how to reach me. Our response was requested by December 27th, before the next committee review. No verdict tonight, Imani said, and no reason to create one in the ballroom. We preserved the license as E3 and the bank request as E4. I called our outside counsel, but the call went to her holiday service. I left a message identifying Lantern Yard and the closing file. Because her firm had handled the project closing, she would not need my version of who held which role. She had the signed record. I considered calling Douglas. The urge lasted less than a minute. If I called before we finished preserving the evidence, the conversation would become about tone, loyalty, and what he had supposedly intended. Facts would have to fight their way back into the room. We wait for counsel, I said. My phone vibrated before I could put it down. The message came from Owen. Did you approve your dad calling Lantern Yard a Keen project? I stared at the words. Owen was supposed to be at the dinner in Edina. The dinner Douglas had described as family only. I stepped into the service corridor, where stacked linen softened the music from the hall. I typed, "Where did you see that?" 3 dots appeared and vanished. Then my phone rang. "Rachel," Owen said quietly, "I think I am sitting inside a business meeting that everyone keeps calling Christmas dinner." Before Owen's message, I had thought the image issue might be a careless marketing mistake. His question changed the likelihood. A printed slide was sitting at the family dinner beside a request for a banking introduction. Still, counsel urged us not to collapse circumstances into proof. "The dinner may explain motive," she said when she returned my call. "Your response does not need motive. It needs authority to speak for Openhearth and documents that answer the claims." She confirmed she had no conflict representing the organization. Her firm had handled Lantern Yard's closing, not Douglas's company or the proposed facility. She asked us to preserve the bank request without downloading unrelated metadata and to keep Celia outside substantive drafting because of her donor role. We also discussed timing. The December 27 deadline allowed a careful response, but the project image was already in circulation. Counsel advised preserving everything that evening, drafting after verification, and submitting when ready. Contacting Douglas first was not legally required, and might invite replacement of the deck before its contents were documented. "Are we obligated to tell him we are responding?" I asked. "The bank will manage its borrower process. Your obligation is not to negotiate Open Hearth's facts with him." That sentence exposed another family habit. Douglas expected advance access to any truth that might inconvenience him, as though being my father gave him a review right over my answer. It did not. At 7:04, Imani preserved the attachments in our record system with their original metadata intact. The event coordinator sent another reminder. Guests were seated. My opening remarks were approaching. Then Owen's name appeared, carrying the first direct link between the lender language and the dinner I had been told not to attend. Owen moved somewhere quieter before he continued. A door closed behind him. "Your father toasted the engagement," he said. Then he put a presentation beside the champagne and asked if I would connect him with Martin Vale. I knew the name only because Bethany had mentioned him. Martin was Owen's former supervisor, now retired after a long career in commercial banking at Brennan. "Is Martin there?" "At the table. Douglas invited him as my mentor. He wants Martin to introduce him to the current expansion team." The chain was suddenly complete. Douglas to Owen, Owen to his retired mentor, the mentor to Brennan's active commercial group. Christmas dinner was not where the loan decision would be made. It was where Douglas hoped to convert family access into banking access. "What exactly does the presentation say?" I asked. "That Keene Building Supply was a principal development partner on Lantern Yard and supplied 40% of the materials. There is a photograph of the building. I asked Bethany whether you had approved it." She looked surprised. "Can you send me a photograph of the slide as it sits there? Include enough of the table to establish context, but do not send anything else from the deck." He paused. "Am I creating trouble for Bethany?" "The trouble already exists. I am asking you to preserve the statement you asked me to verify." The image arrived while we were speaking. The printed deck lay between two champagne glasses. Our facade photograph filled half the page. Beneath it, a caption transformed one paid order into a leading role on a $31.8 million development. "Who is in the room?" I asked. "Douglas, Marian, Bethany, Martin, and me. Not family only." I felt the morning rejection change shape. It still hurt, but it no longer looked like an impulsive act by a difficult father. Douglas had removed the person most likely to contradict his slide, then invited the person most likely to open a bank door. "Do not confront him for me," I said. "Do not forward any confidential Lantern Yard records. Just preserve what you received. I won't make the introduction until this is verified. That is your decision, not a favor to me." When the call ended, Bethany's name appeared on my screen. "Dad is trying to get recognition for helping you. Owen is making it sound dishonest." I answered with the shortest, accurate version I could manage. Keene Building Supply completed one paid $186,400 materials order. It did not develop, sponsor, fund, or supply 40% of Lantern Yard. Did you see the deck before tonight? She read the message. No answer came. Imani joined me in the corridor. I showed her Owen's photograph, and she saved it as E6 with the original message metadata. "This corroborates the setting," she said. "The contracts still prove the role." "Exactly." My father texted next. "Do not embarrass this family tonight." He did not ask what I knew. That told me he already understood why Owen had contacted me. For one ugly second, I imagined walking onto the stage and reading the slide aloud. Hundreds of people were assembling 20 feet away. Celia was there. Donors were there. I had a microphone and the signed agreements. Douglas had counted on my absence in Edina. He had not considered that I would be standing in the one room where Lantern Yard's real work was visible. Then a volunteer opened the corridor door and asked where to seat a mother whose assigned table was too close to the speakers for her son. The question pulled me back to the event we had actually planned. "Table 7 has space," I said. "Move both of them together." The volunteer thanked me and hurried away. I looked at Douglas's warning again. He wanted me to believe the choice was between protecting the family and humiliating it. It was not. My choice was whether to protect an accurate institutional record without turning someone else's first night at Lantern Yard into a stage for my anger. Owen called once more. Martin had put the deck aside and asked whether Keene had been a contractor or investor. Douglas answered that formal labels understated how family enterprises worked. "I did not record it," Owen said. "This is only what I heard." "Write it down while it is fresh. Keep it for your records." He asked whether he and Bethany should leave. I told him I could not manage their dinner from St. Paul. He knew the premise might be false. What he did with that knowledge belonged to him. Bethany finally answered my question. "I did not see the deck before tonight. Dad said you were busy and did not care about Christmas anyway." I wrote, "I cared. I also had an event scheduled since September. Both can be true. Why are you making this so formal?" she asked. "Because he put it in a bank submission." No reply followed. According to Owen's later note, dinner resumed in fragments. Martin offered no introduction. Marian cleared plates too early. Douglas kept the deck beside his chair as if visibility could make it ordinary. I knew those details only through Owen's later account. I never pretended I had witnessed them. In St. Paul, I saved my own contemporaneous note. Time, names, description of the slide, and my instruction not to forward confidential records. Conflict polishes memory without permission. A time-stamped note resisted that polishing, including my own. When I returned to the main hall, the room had filled. Future residents sat beside donors, training kitchen instructors, neighborhood volunteers, and staff who had spent months translating applications and arranging transportation. Nothing about the evening had been improvised after my father's call. The date appeared in board minutes from September. Caterers had been booked before Thanksgiving. Residents had received invitations weeks earlier. Downstairs, the warming center completed its first intake under a separate seasonal occupancy clearance. Upstairs, the apartments remained empty while North River finished punch list work and our compliance team closed pre-occupancy files. We could shelter people that night without pretending the residential wing was ready. The distinction was not glamorous, but good housing work was made of distinctions like that. At the edge of the hall, Celia spoke with a grandfather and his teenage granddaughter. She did not glance toward me or signal that anything unusual had happened. I appreciated the restraint. Imani handed me the printed copy of my remarks. "Counsel called back. She can review a narrow response after your speech." I looked at the paragraph thanking project partners. It named North River Builders, the city housing team, our construction lender, tax credit investor, campaign committee, and resident advisory group. Keene Building Supply was not named because we did not list individual vendors in public remarks. I could add one accurate sentence about its paid order. I could leave the speech as approved. Or I could tell the room why my father had barred me from Christmas. "If I say what happened publicly," I asked, "you turn residents into an audience for a family dispute," Imani said, "and you speak before council finishes reviewing the record. If I say nothing anywhere, then Open Hearth may appear to tolerate false attribution. Our city and tax credit partners could encounter the claim later and wonder whether we approved it." Neither silence nor spectacle was responsible. That left a narrower road. The evening also carried a financial promise of its own. Anchor donors had offered a dollar-for-dollar match up to $420,000, but only if the event closed enough remaining eligible pledges. We had not announced the full amount because it was not unlocked yet. It would fund resident services, not construction overruns or anyone's expansion plan. At the pledge table, a volunteer waved me over. A donor had written $400,000 on a card, but checked the box restricting it to construction. That gift could not count toward a match designated for resident services. "Can we ask her to change the box?" the volunteer whispered. "We can explain the match and let her decide. Do not tell her what to choose." The donor, a woman named Evelyn Park, listened as our campaign chair described the two funds. She kept most of her pledge restricted to construction closeout and moved only $25,000 to resident services. "I know that does not help your announcement as much," she told me. "It helps exactly as much as you authorized," she smiled. "You are not much of a fundraiser." Our campaign chair says the same thing. The chair, standing beside us, shook her head. "I say she makes me document every adjective." The exchange loosened something in my chest. Across town, Douglas had expanded one invoice until it supported a warehouse. In our hall, a donor had declined to move $375,000, and nobody treated her signature as flexible because the larger number would sound better from the stage. A warming center coordinator then asked me to speak with a guest who was reluctant to surrender a rolling cart at intake. The cart could not block the sleeping aisle, but it held everything he owned. We found a locked storage alcove and wrote his name on the claim tag. He watched me attach the matching half to his wristband. "You promise it stays mine?" he asked. "It stays yours. Staff can move it only if there is an emergency, and we log that." He tested the alcove door after it closed. "People say rules and then change them when you are asleep." "These are written at the desk. You can ask for a copy." He did. When I returned upstairs, 2 children were arguing over the paper stars on their table. A volunteer asked if the decorations could go home with residents. I told her yes after the final seating, as long as nobody took a star another child had made. The evening kept presenting small questions of permission, ownership, and whose word controlled what happened. None of them required a speech about governance. They required an answer someone could rely on. The campaign chair updated the eligible total. We still needed $7,000 to trigger the full match, with 6 pledge cards waiting for verification. She would not count verbal promises. "If we miss it?" she asked. "We announce the amount earned and keep fundraising after Christmas." No dramatic appeal? "Tell people what the services do. Let them choose." She returned to the table. I watched staff explain childcare hours to one donor and transit assistance to another. The pledges moved because people understood the use, not because I manufactured an emergency. A future resident named Denise stopped me near the stage. She had toured apartment 314, but would not sign her lease until February, after final approvals. "Can I ask you something before you get busy?" she said. "Of course." She glanced toward the donor tables. "If people who give money disagree with each other, does the building stay stable? I've lived places where one owner got angry and everything changed." The honest answer required more than reassurance. "No single donor owns Lantern Yard," I said. "The building operates through signed agreements, public requirements, a board, and a budget with oversight. Disagreement does not erase your lease rights or our obligations." She studied me, then nodded. That is what I wanted to hear. After she walked away, I looked at the stage differently. The microphone was not mine simply because I was angry and had access to it. People trusted it because I was supposed to use it for the work we had invited them to witness. Imani received counsel's secure callback notice. Before we stepped away, she confirmed the scope one more time. 3 discrepancies, she said. Development role, 40% materials, photo permission. Nothing beyond the request. Keep it that way. The event coordinator gave me a 5-minute signal. I folded my remarks and followed Imani back to the compliance office. Before I chose what to say in public, I wanted to know exactly what we could prove in private. Outside counsel, joined by secure video from her home office, she had handled the lantern yard closing, and the first thing she did was identify the controlling documents without asking me to explain them. Development agreement and roll schedule for parties, she said. Procurement and payment record for vendor scope, campaign license for image rights. Show me the bank's limited request. Imani shared E4. Counsel read all 3 questions, then asked us to answer each in a separate paragraph with an attachment. For the principal development claim, we cited E2. Open Hearth was sponsor and operator, North River was general contractor, the city was land lessor. Keene Building Supply held none of those roles. For the 40% claim, we cited E1. Keene had completed one materials package for $186,400, fully paid. We did not speculate about how Douglas calculated 40%. We stated what our records showed. For the photograph, we cited E3. Open Hearth had not licensed the campaign image to Keene and had found no separate permission request. Preserve the accurate part, counsel said. Do not describe the company as having no involvement. It was a vendor and apparently performed the order properly. That matters to me, I said. Accuracy could not become a weapon I bent in the opposite direction. Douglas's legitimate work did not grow because he was my father, and it did not disappear because he had lied. Counsel drafted a final sentence. Open Hearth requests correction of its project record and takes no position on the borrower's application or any credit outcome. I read it twice. What happens if we do not answer? I asked. Imani spoke first. The false attribution remains unchallenged. If the city, investor, or construction lender later sees it, they may ask why we allowed another company to claim governance and development experience it did not have. Counsel nodded. Silence is not neutral once an authorized verification request reaches the organization. And if I identified Douglas from the stage tonight? You would be making a public accusation before the borrower has answered a private process. You could also expose facts beyond what is needed to protect Open Hearth. The correction is supportable. A public performance creates avoidable risk. On Imani's screen, the unsent packet waited. 3 paragraphs, 3 attachments. No adjectives about Douglas. No demand that the bank punish him. In my hand, my speech offered another path. I could add 1 sentence and make every head in the room turn. I could tell people my father had excluded me from Christmas so he could claim their work. It would be true in the broad sense, and still ahead of the evidence in ways that mattered. My anger wanted witnesses. My responsibility required a record. The event coordinator knocked. Rachel, we need you at the stage. I asked counsel one final question. Can the packet wait until after the remarks? Yes, preserve it. Submit when you authorize it. Imani saved the draft and locked the review folder. 2 paths, she said. I knew what she meant. Use the microphone and let humiliation outrun process, or use the secure portal and accept that due diligence might be slow, private, and outside my control. I walked toward the hall while applause began before I reached the stage. For years, Douglas had accused me of caring more about rules than family. That night, the rules were the only thing preventing my hurt from deciding what hundreds of other people had to remember about Lantern Yard. The campaign chair then showed me the pledge tracker. We were $32,000 short of unlocking the full match, with cards still being verified. She asked if she should announce the gap. Only announce an eligible amount we can document, I said. If the card's clear, give me the verified total. If not, we state what is real. The team had spent months securing conditional commitments. The evening would close a planned campaign, not depend on a miracle check. Counsel asked me to read the proposed response aloud. Spoken sentences reveal accusations that look neutral on a screen. I read the first paragraph at falsely represented. Change that to does not match Open Hearth's records. Imani edited it. The second paragraph originally calculated Keene's invoice as a fraction of the entire project budget. We removed the percentage. The bank asked whether the company supplied 40% of materials, not what its invoice represented against land, services, fees, and financing costs. A dramatic comparison could be mathematically true and still analytically misleading. For the third paragraph, we attached the image license and stated that no permission appeared in our approval log. We did not accuse Douglas of theft because we did not know who downloaded the photograph or how it reached the designer. What if he says he meant family partner, not legal partner? I asked. Counsel pointed to E4. Then he can explain that to the bank. Openhearth should not reinterpret his words for him. Imani checked the project roll schedule against the final closing index. No amendment had added Keene. She checked accounts payable for credits, donations, or unpaid balances. None existed. She checked the campaign ledger for Douglas or the company. Neither was a donor. That last fact embarrassed me, though it should not have. Douglas was free not to donate. The problem was not that he had declined to give, it was that he had converted payment received into generosity supplied. At 7:31, Counsel declared the packet factually supportable. She reminded us that supportable did not mean strategically mandatory. The authorization still belonged to Openhearth, and as executive director, I had to decide whether submitting protected the organization. I thought of the city grant certifications bearing my signature. If the city asked whether I knew another company was claiming a development role, I wanted my answer to be simple. We verified, preserved, and corrected. The coordinator called me to the stage before I could authorize E7. For the next 15 minutes, the microphone would be closer than the secure submit button. From the stage, I could see nearly every person I might have used as a witness. Celia sat near the resident advisory group. Imani stood beside the hall doors with her phone turned face down. Denise was at table 7 with her son. Behind them, the restored depot windows reflected strings of warm lights back into the room. I unfolded my remarks. There was a place after the opening paragraph where I could have departed from the page. One sentence would have done it. My father is using this project to obtain a loan. I imagined the silence after those words, the messages leaving the room, the satisfaction of making Douglas feel excluded from a story he had tried to steal. Then I looked at Denise. Lantern Yard was built to make stability ordinary, I began. Not ceremonial, not dependent on whether one person feels generous on a particular day. I spoke about the 84 apartments that would open after final closeout. I explained that the warming center downstairs could serve people that night because it had received a separate seasonal clearance. I thanked the actual project teams by their actual roles. Our city partners, North River Builders, the construction lender, tax credit investor, campaign committee, resident advisors, staff, and volunteers. I did not name Keene Building Supply. We had not planned to list individual vendors, and I would not redesign the speech around Douglas in either direction. The campaign chair handed me a card with the final eligible pledge total. It exceeded the threshold we needed. Because of the commitments made in this room tonight, I said, the remaining challenge has been met. Our anchor donor's dollar-for-dollar match is now fully unlocked, $420,000 for resident services. The applause rose slowly, then filled the old depot hall. I explained where the money would go: childcare hours, transit assistance, and placements in the training kitchen. Those were promises we could measure later. I finished without mentioning Christmas dinner, the lender deck, or my father. The omission did not feel like surrender. It felt like refusing to let Douglas choose the subject of our event. Afterward, Celia shook my hand like any other donor. "Congratulations on the match," she said. "Thank you." Nothing in her expression promised what the bank would do. I returned to the compliance office with Imani. Counsel rejoined us, reviewed the final attachments, and asked whether I authorized submission. My finger rested over the confirmation control. "The statement does not ask for denial," I said. "It asks for an accurate Openhearth record," Counsel replied, Nothing more. I clicked submit. At 8:57 p.m. on December 24, the secure portal generated a receipt. E7 now contained the 3-point correction, E1 through E4 as support, and the timestamp proving when we acted. Celia acknowledged organizational receipt from the bank side. Her message contained one sentence. The independent review team will evaluate the submission under normal process. No assurance, no secret intervention. That was as it should be. I finally answered Douglas. I corrected the project record. I did not discuss you at the event. He called immediately. I declined the call, turned my phone off, and went back to the hall. The last dinner seating had begun. I tied on an apron and helped carry plates from the training kitchen. A little girl asked whether I owned the building. The question surprised a laugh out of me. No, I said. A non-profit runs it, and a lot of people are responsible for it. But you have keys. Temporary construction keys. The important keys go to residents. Near 11, after the last guests left and the warming center night team took over, I switched my phone back on. Douglas had sent one message at 11:18. You just put every job in my company at risk. I read it standing in the empty hall. The sentence tried to assign me ownership of consequences that had begun in his deck. Still, I did not know what the bank would decide, and I would not pretend the stakes were painless. Employees who never saw the slide could be affected if an expansion failed. What I knew was narrower. I had not asked anyone to close his company. I had not accused him from the stage. I had answered 3 questions with records he had always known existed. I stayed until after midnight. 14 warming center guests had checked in. The campaign chair confirmed every matched pledge had passed its screen, and I signed the event closeout sheet. Only then did I grieve the dinner I had missed. I imagined my place at Marian's table removed before anyone sat down. I wondered if she had made cranberry sauce without orange peel, and noticed the absurdity of remembering my preference while accepting my absence. Those questions had no compliance answer. Imani brought 2 cups of kitchen coffee and sat beside me on the stage. Do you regret not saying it? She asked. Ask me when I am less angry. Fair. I wanted him to feel what I felt that morning. And now? Now I want the record to survive whatever any of us feel. Choosing process did not make me noble. It made the next step reviewable. If the bank approved the facility on other evidence, I would accept it. If it declined, Douglas would call my correction decisive. Either way, I had surrendered the outcome when I chose facts. Before leaving, I printed the E7 receipt and locked it in the closing file. No applause, no visible punishment, only a timestamp proving Open Hearth answered on December 24th. Christmas ended without a family table, but also without me turning Lantern Yard into a weapon. That distinction felt entirely mine. The bank formally logged our submission on December 26th. The notice did not say Douglas was guilty of fraud. It did not freeze accounts, stop payroll, or close existing credit. It said the proposed $7.5 million revolving credit and warehouse expansion facility had been placed on hold while the applicant responded to 3 discrepancies by December 27. I read that distinction aloud to Imani because precision was most important when everyone was frightened. Proposed facility only, I said, existing operations unchanged. Put it in the contact memo, she replied. Douglas called once at 9:03 that morning. I answered because I wanted one clear boundary on record. Withdraw it, he said before I could speak. I cannot withdraw accurate project documents. You used family knowledge to interfere with my financing. The bank contacted Openhearth about claims concerning Openhearth. I answered those claims. You know what that expansion means to my employees. Then submit evidence supporting your statements or correct them. His voice dropped. If you force me to, I will pursue defamation. I looked at the contact memo form Imani had already opened. Future communication about this issue goes through counsel. You think a non-profit title makes you untouchable? No, that is why we used signed records. I ended the call and wrote the time, duration, and substance without adding what I thought of him. Counsel sent Douglas's attorney a routing notice before noon. One of our facilities managers asked whether Keene could stop a shipment or leave us with unfinished work. We reviewed active contracts. Its Lantern Yard package was complete, inspected, and paid. No warranty response was outstanding. North River controlled all remaining punch list work. That independence had not been designed for family conflict. It was simply what completed procurement looked like. Now it kept Douglas from turning a past sale into present leverage. By afternoon, social media posts from the Christmas Eve event were circulating. Photographs showed the paper stars, the warming center intake desk, and the announcement of the match. A local reporter emailed asking whether any major corporate partner had made the result possible. I answered with the campaign structure and named no dispute. Public attention did not give me permission to shape the bank review. The independent credit officer sent one clarification through counsel. Lantern Yard had been identified as a material example supporting Keene's projected institutional contract pipeline. The bank was therefore examining not only the accuracy of one slide, but the reliability of the expansion thesis and management representations connected to it. That did not guarantee denial. Douglas might have other contracts, other evidence, or an explanation the bank accepted. The process remained his opportunity to answer. At 4:22 p.m., Bethany asked to meet the next day. "I have something you should see," she wrote. "Dad sent it before the dinner. December 23 at 8:14 p.m. I asked what it said. Her reply came a minute later. "He told me to keep you away because you would complicate the project story." The contracts already proved Douglas's role. Bethany's message could prove something different. He knew the truth would become harder to manage if I was in the room. Counsel cautioned me not to collect family evidence beyond Openhearth's need. We already had proof of project roles. E5 and E6 could answer when Douglas knew of the discrepancy, but gathering every painful message would turn governance into a family trial. Anger can make relevance expand forever. A childhood insult becomes an exhibit, an old birthday becomes a pattern. Soon the record is no longer correcting 3 statements, it is asking strangers to decide who deserved love. The bank had no role in that question. The next day, December 27th, while I waited for Bethany, Douglas's response arrived at 5. No result followed, only confirmation that it remained under review. Each time my phone lit, my body expected a verdict. Through counsel, Douglas asked whether I would certify that Keene's role was significant in a broader family sense. Our attorney replied that Openhearth could verify contractual facts only. Broader family sense described the space where he preferred to operate, wide enough for money, parenting, names, and obligation to blend until boundaries disappeared. Lantern Yard's records narrowed that space. That was why he experienced them as hostile. The hold remained a hold. Employees worked, trucks made deliveries, payroll cleared. I repeated those facts whenever guilt tried to turn the proposed facility into the entire company. No employee had a right to expansion capital built on a story that was not true. Bethany and Owen came to Lantern Yard on December 27. The main hall was closed, so we met in the project office while crews worked through the residential punch list beyond the glass. My sister looked tired and angry, though I could not tell at whom. She placed her phone on the table without pushing it toward me. "I knew Dad wanted to talk business," she said. I did not know he was going to turn dinner into a presentation. "Did you see the deck before Christmas Eve?" "No. I knew he was describing Lantern Yard as a project that helped Keene move into bigger work. I thought it was normal exaggeration. Parents take credit for their children's success all the time." Not in lender materials. She looked down. I understand that now. Owen explained his part. Douglas had asked him for an introduction to Martin Vale. Martin, in turn, could introduce Douglas to the current Brennan expansion team. Owen had not promised approval or influence, but he had agreed to host his former supervisor at dinner without questioning why. After I saw the slide and your exact description of the supply order, I told Martin I would not make the introduction, he said. I will document what happened if asked. I will not contact anyone inside the bank on your behalf. Good, I said. This does not need a second family channel. Bethany unlocked her phone. The message from Douglas was time-stamped December 23 at 8:14 p.m. Keep Rachel at Lantern Yard tomorrow. If she comes, she will complicate the project story before Owen can help us. Tell her we need family only. The sentence did not establish the project roles. E1 and E2 did that. It corroborated knowledge and motive. Douglas had planned the exclusion before submitting the deck and had recruited Bethany to deliver a false explanation. Did you tell Mom? I asked. I told her Dad wanted a small dinner. She did not ask why Martin was coming. Bethany exported the original message with metadata and also provided the version of the deck Douglas had emailed Owen. Imani preserved both. E5 now sat beside E6, not as substitutes for contracts, but as evidence of how the false record had moved through the family. What happens to Dad? Bethany asked. I do not decide. But you sent the correction. Yes, because I decide what Open Hearth says about its own project. She flinched, and I saw how badly she wanted a clean assignment of blame. If I became the person who caused everything, she would not have to examine the role she had accepted. I should have asked, she said at last. I was trying to keep him calm, and I did not want Owen thinking my family was a problem. So you made me the problem. She nodded once. It was not an apology large enough to repair anything, but it was the first sentence she did not defend. Her motives for bringing the evidence were mixed. She wanted to protect Owen's professional reputation. She wanted their engagement out of Douglas's financing. She wanted to stop being the person asked to make his choices look normal. Mixed motives did not make the evidence unusable, and they did not make us reconciled. Before leaving, Bethany wrote Douglas a factual account of what she had known and what she had not. She copied no one at the bank. Then she told me she would no longer host clients, bankers, or business introductions at family celebrations. Owen said the same boundary would apply to their wedding. That evening, Marian called. Her voice was small. I need to speak to you alone, she said. The family-only lie was mine too. I knew Martin was invited. After Bethany and Owen left, Imani and I reviewed the exported files. The December 23rd message retained sender, recipient, and timestamp. Owen's deck matched the slide in his dinner table photograph. Neither file had been edited after export. Are we sending these to the bank? Imani asked. Only if counsel says they answer a question the contracts cannot. We eventually provided E5 as corroboration when the independent officer asked whether Douglas had reason to know Open Hearth would contest his project description. We explained that Bethany's evidence addressed timing and intent, not project roles. E6 established the version circulating at dinner. The bank did not receive private family chatter beyond those items. Bethany waited in the lobby while Owen retrieved their coats. She admitted Douglas had asked her for small accommodations for years. Change a dinner time, invite a prospect, praise a company announcement, tell me not to argue. Each request seemed too minor to justify conflict. Together they had taught him she would convert his business needs into family expectations. I kept thinking peace was something I could arrange, she said. Peace for whom? She had no answer. I did not tell her she was brave for handing over the message. The choice was necessary, but it also corrected her own participation. Growth did not need applause at the first honest step. Before leaving, she asked if I still wanted to attend her wedding. I told her a wedding invitation was not the question in front of us, and that we should not use one ceremony to settle another. She accepted that answer, though it frightened her. For once, we allowed uncertainty to remain, instead of filling it with a promise neither of us trusted. Marian came to Lantern Yard on January 2nd. I chose the unoccupied residential wing because I did not want to meet at her house and because the project itself kept our conversation honest. Blue tape still marked paint corrections. Cabinet doors stood open for inspection. No residents had moved in, and nobody could confuse construction completion with occupancy. My mother walked beside me until we reached apartment 214. The unit faced the courtyard, where old rail lines had been preserved in the paving. "I knew Owen's mentor was coming," she said. "I knew your father wanted an introduction. I did not know what the deck said." "Why did you let him tell me dinner was family only?" She pressed her gloves together. "Because if I challenged him, he would have turned the whole night into a fight with me. I thought you had your event." I told myself he would be surrounded by people. So the cost went to me. Yes. The direct answer hurt more than an excuse, and respected me more than one. She said Douglas had shown her a statement he wanted the family to sign. It described Lantern Yard as a shared family effort and the bank issue as a misunderstanding caused by my overly technical language. "Did you sign it?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I finally read the invoice amount, and because Bethany showed me his message." I wanted to ask why evidence had succeeded where my word had failed. I already knew the answer. Marian had spent years treating Douglas's anger as weather and my pain as shelterable. A document made avoidance harder, but it did not transform her overnight. "Silence did not preserve the family," I said. "It assigned the conflict to whoever was easiest to exclude." She cried quietly. I did not rush to comfort her. Tears were information, not repair. Marian agreed to 3 things she could actually do. She would stop carrying messages between Douglas and me. She would tell Bethany that she had known the dinner was not family only. She would not sign any statement about Lantern Yard unless Open Hearth confirmed it was accurate. She did not promise to leave Douglas, reinvent herself, or heal our childhood in one afternoon. I did not ask her to. After she left, Imani met me in the corridor with an update from council. Douglas had answered the bank by calling the project language informal shorthand for the Keene family's collective contribution. He supplied the paid invoice but no development agreement, sponsorship document, or image license. The response revealed his strategy. He was not trying to prove the words were accurate. He was trying to make accuracy seem ungenerous. The next morning, his attorney requested a meeting in a neutral conference room. Douglas would bring a proposed clarification for my signature. When counsel forwarded it, the first line described Lantern Yard as a shared Keene family effort. The phrase was softer than principal developer and broader than any contract. It was designed to preserve the same impression without repeating the claim the evidence had disproved. During our walk, Marian stopped at each doorway to read the apartment numbers. She asked what rent would be and how residents qualified. The questions were basic, and I realized she had never asked them while calling Lantern Yard my project. I explained that eligibility, rent limits, and compliance periods came from the financing agreements. Residents were not receiving favors from me. They were entering enforceable leases administered under program rules. "Your father said the family company made this possible," she said. "Many entities made it possible in named roles. His company performed a paid order. That can be respected without becoming something else." She touched a blue tape marker on a doorframe, then withdrew her hand. "He believes correction is humiliation." Because he announced the larger story before checking whether it was his. Marian admitted she had admired the claim at first. It made our divided family sound unified and successful. That comfort had made her reluctant to inspect it. "A flattering story can still use someone," I said. At the elevator, she asked if she could call me on Sundays. I said not yet. Her face fell, but she did not bargain. The most useful thing she did that day was accept a boundary without recruiting guilt to overturn it. Later, Bethany confirmed Marian had told her the truth directly. Douglas then asked Marian to deliver his proposed statement to me. She refused and told him to use counsel. It was a small, observable change, exactly the kind that mattered more than a dramatic promise. On January 5th, I met Douglas in a rented conference room halfway between his office and mine. Our counsel sat beside us. The neutral setting prevented either of us from confusing the meeting with a family visit. Douglas looked older than he had on Christmas morning, but not repentant. He placed the proposed statement on the table. "This resolves everything," he said. "It acknowledges that the project grew from the family's combined support without getting trapped in labels." I read it once. "It preserves the impression that your company helped develop Lantern Yard. I paid for your education. I gave you the discipline to run an organization. My company supplied the project. My name opened doors in this city." The city selected the site through a public process. The financing partners underwrote Open Hearth and the project agreements. Your company won one bid and was paid in full. You hear yourself? One bid, paid in full, as if family is an invoice. A lender deck is not a family album. His attorney shifted, but Douglas kept looking at me. He explained his logic as if persistence could turn it into a contract. He had raised me. He had employed Bethany. He had sold materials to Lantern Yard. People associated the Keen name with business. Therefore, he believed he was entitled to present Lantern Yard as evidence of the family's combined institutional capacity. The rationale was not random. It was the same hierarchy he had enforced for years. Anything a daughter built could be counted as family property, while anything she refused him proved she did not support the family. I set his statement down. "I will not sign this. I will sign one accurate sentence if the bank asks Open Hearth to verify it." I read the sentence counsel and I had prepared. Keen Building Supply completed a fully paid $186,400 materials order for Lantern Yard and held no development, sponsorship, or endorsement role. Douglas stared at the paper. "That sentence could cost me the warehouse." "Your existing operations are not frozen. The bank is reviewing a new facility based on representations in your deck. There are employees counting on that expansion. Then they deserved projections built on facts." He accused me of choosing strangers over blood. I did not answer the accusation because it was meant to move us from verifiable claims to an argument he could never lose. Instead, I stated the conditions for future contact. Any correction had to be written. He could not use my name, Open Hearth, or Lantern Yard in business materials without permission. He could not disguise business access as family contact. Until those conditions were met, communication about the dispute would remain through counsel. "And after?" he asked. "After that, factual repair will have begun." "You mean I still have to apologize?" "I mean correction is not the same as relationship." He left without saying goodbye, but he took the page containing the accurate sentence. 2 days later, the bank sent Open Hearth a new verification request. Attached was a correction under Douglas's signature. For the first time, his description matched the invoice. The bank's correction request included no commentary about Douglas's meeting with me. It asked whether a specific revised sentence matched Open Hearth's records. That narrowness reassured me that the independent officer was testing evidence, not refereeing our relationship. Before answering, we checked each word. Completed meant delivered and accepted. Fully paid matched the accounts payable ledger. Materials order matched procurement. No development or sponsorship role matched E2. We changed one proposed word, partner, to vendor, because partner could recreate the ambiguity we were closing. Douglas accepted the change. The image removal certification required a separate check. Imani captured the date and time when the photograph disappeared from the company website. Counsel confirmed the lender package had been replaced in the secure file. We could not certify that no private copy existed anywhere, so our response said only that the identified uses had been removed. That level of care felt almost absurd after the bluntness of the original claim. Yet, repair had to be more exact than the harm, otherwise, a soft correction would leave the false impression alive. I wondered whether Douglas took the accurate sentence because he understood, or because every other route had closed. The record could not answer that. Relationship might over time. I refused to let curiosity about his heart delay correction of his documents. When Open Hearth submitted its verification, Imani closed the evidence folder to edits. Every item had a source, access history, purpose, and payoff. The story no longer depended on which family member sounded most convincing. Lantern Yard's board compliance chair reviewed whether my family relationship had made Open Hearth respond more aggressively than it would have to another vendor. Imani supplied the timeline and counsel's review. The chair found the response proportionate and recommended a standard protocol for future third-party claims. The scrutiny mattered. Fairness had to apply when it pointed at me, too. On January 8th, the bank asked one final question. Had Keen Building Supply's performance on the actual order been deficient? We answered no. The package had been delivered and accepted without defect. I could imagine Douglas resenting that the answer did not save his application. I included it because the same rule applied in both directions. His inaccurate claims did not license me to damage his legitimate record. Counsel said the remaining decision belonged to underwriting. On January 9, Douglas confirmed that he had removed a Lantern Yard case study page from an internal sales packet, as well as the website. Counsel added the notice to E8. Douglas's written correction adopted our sentence almost exactly. It identified Keen Building Supply as a paid materials vendor, removed every development and sponsorship reference, and withdrew the 40% claim. A second certification stated that the Lantern Yard photograph had been removed from the lender package and the company's website. Imani checked the public site. The image was gone. Counsel confirmed the revised bank record. We logged the documents as E8. Open Hearth answered one question. The correction matched our records. We did not recommend approval or denial. We did not evaluate Keen's other contracts. We did not tell the bank what kind of man Douglas was. On January 10, the independent credit officer issued the decision to Keen Building Supply. Counsel later received the portion relevant to Open Hearth's verification. Brennan Commercial Bank would not proceed with the proposed $7.5 million revolving credit and warehouse expansion facility. Lantern Yard had been presented as material proof that Keen had already scaled into institutional project work, and that its projected pipeline justified the expansion. Once that example could not be substantiated and required correction, the underwriting team could not rely on the expansion thesis or the related management representations. The decision was serious and bounded. Keen's existing lawful accounts remained open. Current credit and payroll were not frozen. There was no criminal referral, federal investigation, or dramatic seizure of the business. The bank simply declined to lend new money on the case Douglas had presented. Counsel warned me that Douglas might characterize the denial more broadly. By noon, Bethany confirmed he had told two managers that the bank pulled our financing. She asked whether she should correct them. Use the notice, I said. The proposed expansion facility was declined. Do not speculate about anything else. She sent that sentence to Douglas and told him she would not repeat the broader version. He did not thank her, but he corrected the managers himself. Existing deliveries continued that afternoon. The distinction did not make the denial painless. It stopped fear from turning one lost proposal into an imaginary collapse. Owen received a final message from Martin saying he had not contacted the active Brennan team and would not discuss the application. That closed the informal route Douglas had hoped to use at Christmas. The bank's answer had come through underwriting, not through a retired mentor's favor or disapproval. At Lantern Yard, I told only the board chair and Imani that the verification matter had closed. Staff did not need the result to do their jobs. One facilities employee asked whether Keene would remain eligible to bid on future work. We answered that any future procurement would follow conflict disclosures and standard qualification rules. The correction did not create a permanent blacklist. That answer surprised him. It also clarified the difference between consequence and revenge. Douglas had lost the facility attached to his unsupported expansion case. He had not lost every lawful opportunity his company might earn later. When I read the notice, I felt relief, grief, and no triumph. Due diligence had done what I needed it to do: separate a paid invoice from a development role. It could not give me back Christmas morning, or make my father understand why the distinction mattered. Bethany and Owen kept their engagement. Their changes were practical. They removed Douglas's business contacts from wedding planning, unless those people were genuine personal guests. Bethany corrected her earlier statement that Dad had helped build Lantern Yard when she spoke with Owen. She contacted me directly instead of sending Marian to soften difficult messages. She did not ask me to call those choices forgiveness. Marian registered for Lantern Yard's public open house through the same system as everyone else. She arrived on time, joined a scheduled tour, and did not ask me to leave work for a private family performance. We spoke for 6 minutes near the training kitchen. It was cordial and unfinished. Douglas sent me the bank's receipt confirming that his correction had been accepted into the file. He did not include an apology. I replied, "The factual correction satisfies the first condition. It does not resolve the relationship." He did not answer. By the end of January, the construction punch list closed. Final occupancy approvals arrived. Our property management team scheduled the first lease signings for February. The public and business questions now had answers. Open Heart's record was accurate. The proposed facility had been declined outside my family, and February lease signings were scheduled. The emotional answer still belonged to the doors about to open. Lantern Yard's first lease signing day came in February, under a pale, bright sky. By then, inspectors had returned, staff had tested keys, and the last residential approvals were posted. The training kitchen had begun its first placement cycle, while the warming center continued under its own program rules. The campus was no longer a picture of a promise. Each part was operating under the agreements that made the promise real. I arrived early to walk apartment 314 one last time. The refrigerator held temperature, the windows locked. Hot water reached the tap. A smoke detector that had chirped during testing had been replaced. In the bedroom, sunlight crossed the floor where Denise's son had said he wanted to put a desk. The checks were ordinary and exact. Denise would not need a personal relationship with me to receive a safe apartment. She would not have to perform gratitude to keep it. Her rights would survive my mood, my employment, and my family crisis. The board chair had asked whether local media should photograph the first key presentation. I said reporters could attend the public open house, but lease signing was a private threshold unless a resident chose otherwise. Denise's first entrance did not belong to our campaign. At 8:30, I took a seat at the lobby check-in table. There was no award ceremony. We checked identification, directed residents to lease review rooms, and pointed children toward crayons and paper beside the coffee station. A property manager rang a small desk bell each time a packet was ready, not for applause, only so the next family knew where to go. The first resident was an older man named Calvin, who asked 3 times whether the listed utility allowance could change his rent. Our leasing specialist walked him through the calculation each time without impatience. He signed only when he could explain it back in his own words. The second family discovered a middle initial missing from one page. We reprinted it. Nobody told them the error was close enough. Watching those corrections, I thought about how often people with authority ask everyone else to accept an approximation because accuracy is inconvenient. Here, a name had to be right before a key changed hands. Imani arrived carrying the final E1 through E8 index. We archived the bank correspondence separately from resident files and closed the compliance matter. "Ready to call it finished?" she asked. "The file, yes. And the family?" "Families do not have a close file button," she smiled. "Terrible design." At 10:15, Denise stepped off the elevator with her son and 2 folders pressed against her coat. He recognized me and immediately asked about the paper stars from Christmas. I told him staff had saved them for the community room. "All 3?" he asked. "If your name was on all 3, "It was on 2. The best one was anonymous." "Then we will need your expert identification." While he went to inspect the crayons, Denise lowered her voice. She had received a call offering extra work and worried that accepting it might make her ineligible before move-in. Instead of reassuring her from memory, I brought over the leasing specialist. They reviewed the reporting rule and confirmed that she could accept the shifts. She would simply report the income change. "I almost turned it down," Denise said after the specialist left. "You did the right thing by asking before deciding." That was what stability looked like at close range. Not certainty that nothing would change, but a reliable place to bring a question before fear made the choice. The property manager reviewed every lease page with Denise. She initialed the rent calculation, emergency contact form, community rules, and move-in condition report. When she reached the signature line, she paused. "4 years?" she asked me. "From the first feasibility work to today." "I meant us. We have moved 4 times in 4 years." I had almost answered the wrong question, because I was still measuring the day through the project. I pulled my chair back and let the moment belong to her. Denise signed. A staff member handed me the key envelope because I had promised to walk them upstairs. Her name was printed above the apartment number. In the elevator, her son asked whether the paper stars from Christmas were still somewhere in the building. I told him they had been saved for the community room. He said that was good because he had made 3 and wanted to find his best one. At apartment 314, I handed the envelope to Denise. "This one is yours," I said. She looked at her name, then slid the key into the lock herself. The door opened onto an empty living room filled with winter light. She stood on the threshold for a long breath before stepping inside. That was the image I had wanted Lantern Yard to create. Not my face on a stage, not Douglas's company name beneath a borrowed photograph. A resident opening a door under a lease that belonged to her. The $420,000 match was already becoming ordinary things. Childcare hours for parents in the training program, transit passes for residents starting new jobs, and paid placements in the kitchen downstairs. The Christmas Eve applause had turned into bus rides, work schedules, and time someone could count on. My phone vibrated while Denise and her son chose where to place a small table. The message was from Douglas. Could we meet sometime? No business, no project, just coffee. I did not answer immediately. Months earlier, I would have read delay as cruelty and acceptance as proof that I still had a family. Now I understood that a boundary was not revenge and a request was not yet repair. Douglas had finally asked for contact without attaching a deal. That mattered. It did not erase what had happened. I filed the message in my mind beside the conditions already stated. Then I put the phone away. Denise called me from the bedroom doorway. Her key had stuck in the second lock, and she wanted to know whether she was turning it correctly. I showed her once, then gave it back. She tried again. The lock turned cleanly. When my father withdrew my place at Christmas, he believed access was his to grant and remove. For years I had mistaken an invitation into his room for evidence that I belonged somewhere. Lantern Yard taught me a different measure. Fair terms were written down, roles were named, doors opened for the people whose rights were attached to them, not for whoever told the most impressive story. I walked with Denise back into the hall and watched her lock and unlock the apartment until the motion felt familiar. An invitation can disappear with one phone call from the person controlling the table. Belonging built on fair terms survives because no one person's approval owns the door.